My name is Rebecca Brenner Graham. I am author of Dear Miss Perkins, a story of Frances Perkins's efforts to aid refugees from Nazi Germany. Frances Perkins was the first woman cabinet secretary and also the longest-serving Secretary of Labor in U.S. history. And many people might get that right in trivia, but what they don't know is that she oversaw the Immigration Naturalization Service, the INS, throughout the German Jewish refugee crisis when refugees were escaping from Nazi Germany. Frances Perkins had served as industrial commissioner in Franklin D. Roosevelt's gubernatorial cabinet in the state of New York. She reflected the work of broader women's social reform movements, so that was why he appointed her, a non-traditional choice, a woman and not a labor union leader. And a lot of the labor unions at the time were anti-immigrant, so she was the first pro-immigrant Secretary of Labor. But it was not the priority that she came in to work on. She was focused on priorities like Social Security, the minimum wage. She actually achieved all of those except for universal health care. But then her personal friend, Dorothy Thompson, was a journalist, an American journalist overseas in Germany during the rise of the Nazi Party, and she communicated to Perkins how bad it was. So at one of the first cabinet meetings, Perkins came in with a plan to help refugees using an often overlooked provision in the Immigration Act of 1917 called a charge bond, where the Secretary of Labor could accept a sum of $500 from an American citizen to prevent a possible immigrant from burdening the U.S. economy. Then that put her in a turf war against the State Department because they had authority over immigration before the person in question reached the United States. And FDR did what he did when two cabinet secretaries disagreed. He threw it to a third cabinet secretary, the Attorney General Homer Styles Cummings, who decided in favor of Frances Perkins and that she may use charge bonds. She ended up not using charge bonds for a variety of reasons, but through word of mouth, Jewish activists heard that the Secretary of Labor wanted to help. So one of them, named Cecilia Rozovsky, approached Perkins with a plan to use charge bonds to help child refugees, thinking that they would be more sympathetic to the American population. Cecilia Rozovsky was the Jewish woman activist who was personally canvassing homes in Jewish neighborhoods looking for people to take in refugee children. And through a series of conversations between the Jewish activists, the Department of Labor, and the Department of State, they ended up using visas for child refugees, and several hundred of them came to the United States between 1934 and 1941 in a program that was overseen by Perkins's Department of Labor, including the Children's Bureau. At the same time, another policy that she used was the extension of visitor visas. So if somebody from Nazi Germany was already in the US and their life was in danger, she would extend their visa. And then after the Kristallnacht pogrom in November 1938, President Roosevelt made that the official policy of the executive branch by stating it in a press conference, but Frances Perkins had recommended that as early as 5 years before Kristallnacht. In 1940, Franklin D. Roosevelt transferred the INS from the Department of Labor to the Department of Justice, which mostly ended Perkins's chance to help, but before then, she extended the visas of over 10,000 people who were able to live out the rest of their lives because a person in a position of power and authority had the tremendous capacity to care about people that she could not see. I see the primary takeaway from Dear Miss Perkins as in times of political and humanitarian crises, each person can do what they do best. So Frances Perkins was not, for example, swimming out to help the refugees on the infamous St. Louis, but she was extraordinary at taking ideas from outside of government and helping to bring them into American government. She did that on other policies like Social Security and the Fair Labor Standards Act, but she also did that on immigration with the belief that immigrants are good for the American economy and society. This topic was my undergraduate thesis. When I was a junior at Mount Holyoke College in 2014, I was looking for a summer internship, and I received an email from the Mount Holyoke Career Development Center that said Paid American History Internship in Washington, D.C. And I applied for it, and what it was organizing the research of Kirsten Downey author of The Woman Behind the New Deal, which is a biography of Frances Perkins. There are 2 chapters about refugee policy in that book, and Kirsten Downey pointed me in the direction of thousands more documents at the National Archives at College Park, Maryland. It then became my undergraduate thesis. I did a PhD dissertation on a completely different subject, American 19th century religion-state relations through the lens of Sunday mail delivery, which is more academic than Frances Perkins. And a few weeks after I defended my dissertation, I was walking through Barnes & Noble, and I saw a book that had nothing to do with Frances Perkins or Sunday mail. It was The Warburgs by Ron Chernow. And one of the Warburgs, Gisela Warburg, married Frances Perkins' Solicitor of Labor, Charles Wyzanski, which is really in the weeds, right? And so I was flipping through the index, because why wouldn't I, to see what it said about Gisela Warburg, and that's how I realized that I still cared about the topic that I had researched when I was 21, 6 years before then, and that no one had written a book on it yet, and that I wanted to do so.